I will be reading from a text for this portion. It's a case study. The case study has been accepted for publication in 3 different books by the fall. The name on the case has been selected as Sandy. Many of you know Sandra Russell, who was a longtime colleague of mine, who died riding horseback, had an asthma attack last July. Sandy was my psych assistant at the time she died. Sandy had been following the development of all of the themes we're talking about today for over 10 years with me, and had been contributing active material to the understanding of the organizing experience, to the transference psychosis. And I think it's fair to say that no one understood the transference psychosis and how to work with it better than Sandra Russell. In my book, which will come out in December, In Search of the Lost Mother of Infancy, there's a case study that Sandy presented in one of our conference groups, morning conference groups, and it'll be a memorial to her. The case that I will be discussing is a very well-developed woman who, after a number of years of therapy, moved to dealing with this very deep level of transference that we're talking about. I'm only going to present one short vignette, and it's at the end of about a 6-month period of heavy working through. And in the published version of the case, we go through a series of vignettes moving to this particular moment in which the countertransference set up a regression. So because of the nature of the material and for reasons of discretion, I do need to stick closely with the text. A 31-year-old woman in therapy for a long period of time, 4 times a week, psychoanalytically oriented psychotherapy, and I think we'll learn something from her that will put us all in good stead. The earliest instance of the theme which stimulated my countertransference regression occurred several years ago. I recall vivid a fantasy of Sandy about 10 feet away, facing me in a small, subdued crowd. She was jumping up and down enthusiastically, smiling and waving, trying to attract my attention. That was my fantasy, based on our interaction. I reported my countertransference fantasy to her at the time. It was discussed in terms of how she had never felt seen by her parents. In fact, she never felt that she belonged to them, or to anyone else for that matter. She had always felt somehow different, set apart, isolated and separated from others, not really a part of any group or relationship. As a result of our analytic work, she now feels that sometimes she belongs to Mark, her long-term boyfriend, and at times she feels she belongs to me. By the way this is set, the format this is set in within the longer case study, it's first person, and it's my discussion with a consultant about the case. And in fact, the consultant was Bob Hilton. And so I'm actually speaking to Bob in this text. Sometime later, the theme emerged of her interpersonal intensity, and agonizing over a series of relationships in which, for some mysterious reason, she felt that people seemed to shun her, to silently ridicule her, to turn their backs quietly on her, to fail to reciprocate her friendly overtures. She worried perhaps she were too intense. Intense was a word that seemed to summarize a set of qualities that she felt were perceived by others as intrusive, aggressive, demanding, challenging, complaining, insisting, being pushy, and so forth. Those were the feelings that she had about it. On the one hand, Sandy was proud of her assertiveness as a woman and pleased at her ability to make things happen, to express concerns for others, to stand up for what's right and not be pushed around. But she feared that her intensity drove people away, caused people to be afraid of her or not to like her. She's a bright woman with keen insight into people, and it seems that perhaps she saw too much, that she knew too much about what motivated people for her own good. It seems she reads people deeply in ways that makes them uncomfortable, or perhaps provokes them in ways. But despite these intense, somewhat abrasive qualities, Sandy has many friends, is well-liked, and is respected for her integrity, vision, and her insight. What isn't a part of this is that Sandy suffered prolonged, intense, and severe childhood abuse, though I don't have reason to believe that it ever actually went into violence or molestation. It was severe emotional abuse, and you'll feel the quality of it as the case develops. In the context of an ongoing dialogue about her intensity, I had occasion to remark several times how, when she first saw me in the waiting room, and sometimes on leaving the office as well, she seemed to take me in, to scrutinize me deeply to the point that I sometimes felt very uncomfortable. In psychoanalysis, I've cultivated a habit for many years of avoiding heavy eye contact, often averting my eyes so as not to make people feel watched. Limited eye contact with clients now feels natural and comfortable for me after years of cultivating this, especially with analytic clients who use the analytic couch. But often Sandy would pull for eye contact by staring and then follow up her gaze or scrutiny with questions about how I was. Was I okay today? What was I thinking? I found all of this mildly invasive and uncomfortable, but I wasn't sure why, and I wasn't sure what could be said about it at this point in time. On several occasions, Sandy intuited that I was having an off day, and she commented to that effect. Though I had not perceived any irregularities in my mood that day. Has this happened to you? On 2 or 3 occasions when she was upset by what she perceived to be my mental state, I was able to report back to her later that later in the day others had also noticed my being somewhat bland or unresponsive as well, and so it wasn't just transference. I was having an off day and I wasn't aware of it. I reported this back to her in the spirit of validating her perception of my unconscious moods. I questioned the possible meanings of her extreme sensitivity. The main conclusion we drew that was, as a child, she was so traumatized by her parents' unavailable or destructive moods that she routinely surveyed people for where they might be coming from that moment. It seemed that some basic, almost survival mechanism was being noted. She needed to know if I was okay, how I was feeling. Was I going to be emotionally available to her? Was she going to be safe with me today? Or were there hidden emotional agendas or dangers that she needed to be aware of? In time, the question of the interpersonal intensity that seemed to create discomfort in others was linked to her need to read the unconscious moods and motivations. I volunteered how uncomfortable I felt at being scrutinized visually and emotionally, but stated that I understood her need to check me out each day, though the need was clearly greater on some occasions. Early in the analysis, she began to ask for hugs at the end of sessions. These goodbye hugs began in the context of regressive moments when she felt desperate and wasn't sure how she could leave or how she could make it to the next day or through the weekend. Afterwards, on several occasions, I explained my discomfort with the hugs. She assured me that hugs were very human. She expressed, and that hugs expressed connection. I explained that while I wasn't committed to total abstinence of touching like many analysts, that I always felt physical contact of any sort needed to be understood, and that I always felt uncomfortable with physical contact that had not yet been understood. She thought analysts were phobic of physical contact and had problems themselves. No doubt fearing overstimulation or sexualization of the contact by the client. Hugs at the end of session, she said, had nothing to do with that. They were an ordinary part of human warmth and understanding. But during periods in which she felt stronger, hugs at the end of the session could be omitted, I think mostly for my sake. Sandy did, however, experience a series of powerful sessions in which, when she was emotionally pulling away during sessions, I extended my hand and held on to her while struggling to maintain emotional contact with her as well. I later explained that what I believed to be a critical and concrete aspect on such occasions. It served to keep us together when she was losing her sense of me at the moment. Those of you that have already been exposed to my work on the organizing experience, the position that I have taken, and so far as I know, I'm the first psychoanalyst anywhere to ever write, saying that there may be times and places in which carefully timed special physical contact is appropriate and necessary to the interpretive moment, not for comfort, not for safety, but for interpretation, and the interpretation is one specific kind. When the organizing transference is together, recall I was talking about the reaching out and the touching, just at the moment when the person is reaching out in the session and they start to pull back, if the client is now working on staying there, this may be a time to say, would it help if you held on to me? Because at this point in time, we're dealing with a very regressed aspect of ourselves that may need the concretization of physical contact to actually make that. We think of Michelangelo's version of the enlivenment of Adam on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. the logos is transmitted to human souls through touch. In the Bible we hear it's through breath. But the whole symposium that Brazelton did on touch a few years ago, all of the presenters said that the most important thing about touch was the motivator of the toucher. And so I'm not advocating physical contact or touch carelessly, but for this one particular purpose, at critical moments when two people are both working on holding on to one another, touch may help. And we had done that on several occasions, and she had held on to me. Slowly, the organizing transference began to be traced and defined in terms of how she was more or less present in the room, or more or less on a given day available for contact. At first, Sandy believed she was present in contact most of the time. But slowly she began to realize that she was almost never present in an interpersonally, emotionally engaging way, and that she often had not the slightest idea of who I was. On several occasions she said, "I can feel so much closer to you when I'm not here with you." Okay? But you see, what we're talking about is an internalization that she feels, but then we're actually there trying to make a contact. The psychotic element in the transference had blocked it off. This was interpreted how difficult it was to actually establish a sense of deep and meaningful interaction with me in which she could actually feel my presence as a real person, separate and different from herself. She had developed a fantasy of me, of who I was, so she could carry on a reassuring dialogue with me in my absence. But when it came to knowing who I was, in the sense of really being able to be here in the here and now and interact with me, she often felt lost. She felt discouraged by this, and she said she felt disabled by it. I was able in time to draw a distinction between her feeling attached to me in a safe and comfortable way and her feeling connected to me. That is, her being able to feel free, feel open and active channels for communication and connection between two real, live, interacting beings. Sandy was at first upset when I applied this attachment versus connection distinction to hugs at the end of the hour. She did not like the idea that her reaching out for physical contact might stem more from an attaching, clinging impulse or a need for physical comfort or reassurance rather than from a communicating, connecting interaction. But on several occasions, she clearly felt the distinction between attachment and connection and then began to limit the hugs to more special occasions. A series of empathic breaches occurred over time in which Sandy felt emotionally unresponded to by me. Her view was that just when she really needed me to be emotionally present, I would somehow withdraw. She believed that I couldn't tolerate neediness or dependency from her, and so I'd withdraw or disconnect and go to a cold, critical, imperious place. Now, I could indeed feel the abrupt disconnections. I could feel her despair, her agony, and her rage, and how it seemed that I wasn't there for her. But I could not see or experience the pattern she believed to be present. To me, it seemed that her agonies and disconnections came upon the heels of some connection that she had established with me rather than from my withdrawing from her. That is, we had very different views. She felt that just as she approached, I would pull back. I felt that just as we had made contact, she would experience me as cold and imperious and withdrawing. After several empathic breaches, I learned to note that at the first inklings of rage or of an intense, invasive, or accusatory demeanor on her part, I did indeed tend to become more silent because I would be puzzled, attentive, or thoughtful, not having any idea of where she was coming from or not understanding the nature or the meaning of her manner. My caution and increased alertness would then be felt by her as cold withdrawal. So I was indeed doing something, but our experiences of what I was doing were different. Afterwards, I'd be told by her exactly what I should have done or said in these moments that would have been more empathic. You've had that happen to you too. However, the empathic response I should have given had not occurred to me at that moment because I was usually in a more abstract tracking mode, trying to figure out what was happening. That is, when I sensed sourness, intensity, or evasiveness, I tended to begin reviewing in my head the overall context of the past weeks and months, while listening as carefully as possible for what the present problem was within the overall context of her personality and our long-term interaction. While I was puzzling in this way, she might insist on some sort of responsiveness for me. Her need for immediate responsiveness would catch me off balance. It seemed that under these conditions, no response I ever gave was satisfactory, and her rage would escalate. Though I'm not sure if any response I might have given at that time would have been more helpful or prevented it. Sandy's complaint was invariably that I was inappropriately cold and withdrawing. In quieter times, I seemed to be able to show her the connections and the disconnections I was tracking, and she seemed to understand them. But in the moment she would tense up, she would feel locked into a fight with me over how I would coldly withdraw, think her complaints to be transference, blame her for disconnecting, and see her as nuts and myself okay and all right. That was... There had been a series of interactions that were distressing to both of us. We tended to have different views about what was happening. She believed that I always somehow withdrew when she felt needy and that she had a bad reaction to it. She accused me of refusing to examine my reaction or to acknowledge that my faulty responsiveness made it impossible for her to trust me or to trust her analysis. She feared I was just going to do it again and worried that there was no point in continuing her relationship with me, that I had basically a narcissistic personality defect and could not keep from rejecting her. It seemed to me that if Sandy would feel something real in the interpersonal connection or in her body in relationship to our connection, something internal would occur, causing her to feel that I was cold, isolated, critical, withdrawing, skeptical, and disgusted with her for being so dependent and needy. My overall tracking for some months had been related to the ways in which she could not allow connection or engagement between us to occur and the way she had closed it off when it did occur. I could hear her insistence that at these breach moments, the distancing problem was with me and not with her. I could see she needed me to cop to her accusations of my inappropriate emotional coldness and withdrawal. If I did not readily accept her blame or the blame for the emotional withdrawal, this further escalated her distress because I was in effect saying, like her parents had always said, that it was her fault, that I was right, that she was sick, excessively needing, bad, wrong, pathological. I became especially interested in studying the possibility that Sandy managed to produce these breaches by somehow using features of my personality in order to relive the anguish of her infancy and childhood. I considered the possibility that my tracking on a more abstract plane than she wanted to be heard on could be an intellectualizing defense on my part, a way of avoiding her connecting overtures. Perhaps my intellectualizing defense was activated when, as she claimed, she was most needy. But whether or not I was being defensive or my moods made me less available to connect with, I had the distinct impression that Sandy was using features in my personality to accomplish transferentially determined disconnections. I tried on several occasions to suggest this, but was met with the firm conviction that there was a narcissistic personality flaw in me that I was trying to cover up and to shift the blame onto her. If I was correct in believing that she ferreted out something in me to stimulate or to attach her organizing transference to, how was I to show her that without her feeling that I was replicating her parents' crime of shifting the blame to her and further enraging her? What was going on and how were we to sort it all out? We both had become clear that these disruptions tend to occur more frequently on Fridays before the weekend break and before holidays. The precipitating incident, I'm still speaking to Bob, okay, leading to our next distress occurred on a Friday afternoon. The week had gone comfortably with her allowing herself more body feeling that day than usual. I thought Friday might go well also. I was, however, aware that I was going backpacking. It would not be near a phone for 48 hours. I might need to tell her this, since she often asked to know where I could be reached on weekends. It seemed to me I was having a good day. I was looking forward to a beautiful weekend in the mountains with close friends and spectacular autumn weather promising. In the waiting room, I felt her penetrating eyes and averted mind as I usually do. In the hallway, she made a full turn around to take me in again, something she's not done before. I felt closely scrutinized and averted my eyes again. The past couple of months, it seemed to me that she had been aware of watching me in the waiting room since I had made the comment about her intense eye contact. On a couple of occasions, there had even been an exchange what I took to be sort of knowing glances as we were both thinking about the eye contact and what it might mean for both of us. In an instant, as I'm reviewing all of this in my mind, tracking abstractly, I think it's Friday, and she's forcing me to disconnect. She's forcing me to pull back from her intense, intrusive scrutiny. So I'm thinking, I see what's happening, and I'm pleased that I think I see it. I feel penetrated, and I, being who I am, knee-jerk withdraw. She knows this about me. With the weekend coming up, she's attempting to either break the potential connection or to prevent one from occurring today by using my instinctive withdrawal from her gaze. In my consulting room, instead of moving to the couch as usual, she turns, she faces me and asks if I'm okay. I assure her I am, but here comes the breach. When you scrutinize me, I said, it forces me to withdraw. She was enraged. That's ridiculous. How could she force me to withdraw? There it is again, and I'm blaming her for it. She wants that in writing because no one would ever believe it otherwise. In my attempting to explain my reaction further, clearly a mistake in these circumstances, as Virginia is teaching us, I remind her of my aversion to her intense stare and comment that if she wanted to connect with me today, she knows that that's certainly not the way to do it. She was further angered. There's another case I published that's almost as bad. I attempt a few other rationalizations that failed, and then I became quiet, waiting to hear it all out to see if there was some element I could perhaps take hold of. My silence is further enraging to her. Towards the end of the rocky session, filled with anger and silence and despair, she announces that she had had a good week, that last night she was absolutely overjoyed, and she even wrote an exciting poem which she had brought that day and had wanted to share with me. She is happy with what is happening with her, with our work together, and with me, and she came to share it with me today until I ruined it. Instead of waiting to see where she was coming from, I had wrecked the session by disconnecting. She never got to read the poem. Every session the following week, Sandy sits up to confront me. She claims that I always do this to her. Just when she's ready to connect, I manage to spoil it somehow. I'm an unanalyzed analyst. She lists the times that I failed her and then blamed her for being somehow pathological. I have a deep character flaw that I will never get over, so what's the point of trying to relate to me? If every time when she's ready to connect, I wreck it, what's the use of her continuing analysis? We need an arbitrator, someone who can show me my part in all of this. My feeble attempts to talk about our overall context, about her intensity, about eye contact, about her using my discomfort at her scrutiny in order to achieve disconnection, all of these things fall on deaf ears. She's on a rageful roll, and nothing I can do or say engages her in thought about what other things may also be happening. Her body is drawn up tight, her eyes are piercing, her voice is tense, authoritative, her manner at this point confident and strident. I've done it to her again, and it has to stop. As she reviews past incidents that she believes I've refused to acknowledge my part in, I repeatedly attempt to correct her, to remind her that I have acknowledged how I failed to be empathic, but that acknowledgement has not helped her. I continue to ask if it's possible for us to notice how she's reacting to my empathic error. Each time she interprets this as my trying to blame her and to hold her responsible for what I have done wrong. The attack is amplified on Tuesday with her pulling all the stops on her anger, dredging up every complaint and flaw in my nature she can think of, every inadequate thing I've ever said or done in the past. At least that's the way it seemed to me. By mid-session Wednesday, I'm exasperated, and I'm banging my hands on the arms of my chair. This is where Bob catches me, okay? Almost shoutingly that I did not say she was a bad person. I did not say it was her fault, or that my response last Friday was the best one. I didn't say any of that. I only said that we are different people with different ways of thinking and responding. I have a real personality that responds to things that she does. I suggest that she may be using my personal style of responsiveness for her purposes that are unconscious. I was angry that she persisted in turning everything I said to mean that I was okay and she wasn't. I was struggling not to defend myself against her harsh attacks and to find some way of validating her feelings. But she turned my comments into how nuts I think she is, how I think everything is transference, and that I still believe I haven't done anything to deserve her anger and disillusionment. Toward the end of that session, I finally get myself in a place where I am able to say, as sincerely as I knew how, that she's absolutely right, that I had started last Friday's session very badly. She then is quieter, and I hope, listening to what I have to say in this sequence, I try to explain the long-term tracking that I'm doing. I said that when I felt her gaze and her immediate demand to know if I was okay, I mistakenly responded on the abstract plane I was considering at the moment, rather than waiting to see where she was coming from. She was having a joyous body experience. She had written a poem, and she wanted to share it with me. A concrete moment of happy sharing was what she had wanted. My error, I said, was in responding from another plane than she was on. In struggling to explain how, given who I am and our previous discussions about her intense gaze, she can expect me to avert my eyes when she stares at me, I likened it to the hugs at the end of the hour that I thought she had previously given an indication of understanding. I explained that if she wanted to interact comfortably with me, neither of these modes, neither the staring nor the hugs, would work because they make me personally uncomfortable. I've shown her I can go along with what she wants, but if her desire is to achieve a mutually comfortable interpersonal connection, given who I am, those means will not achieve it. This doesn't make me right and her wrong. It's merely the way that I am. The intensity and physical contact are simply not ways of approaching me that she can count on a favorable response to. She'd become quiet and thoughtful and left silently. I hoped I had acknowledged the nature of my error and how it had indeed prevented me from being with her, and how that replicated the numerous times her parents had done just that to her, leaving her isolated and badly damaged as a result. The next day she arrived, utterly devastated. She could see now that I definitely could not be trusted. All along she had believed me. She had hoped that our relationship would be different. She had believed that I could be emotionally honest, but from my response yesterday, she could see that there was no hope. No hope for me, no hope for our relationship, no hope for her. All I could cop to was an error in timing, but the fatal flaw remained. I still believed that it was her fault, not mine. Further, I had humiliated her by saying that I never wanted hugs, that I didn't like them, that they were all her neediness and nothing I cared for. And she said it simply wasn't true. She knew that I had engaged warmly in those hugs. Or if it was true, that I hated her need of the hugs, then I was dishonest when I had hugged her. I managed not to be defensively corrective of how she turned things today, but only echoed her despair and how this was exactly the despair she has experienced all of her life with the emotional dishonesty of her parents. I had encouraged her earlier to go over her concerns with a consultant we both knew. I brought that possibility up again, this time as a suggestion, as a way out of her despair. Near the end of the session, there was a long silence. Slowly, tears began to trickle down her cheeks. She was barely able to whisper, "Betrayal. What a horrible, horrible betrayal." To believe someone is emotionally honest and then to find out later that they haven't been. As Sandy left, I mentioned I would be home all weekend in case she had anything to tell me. By Monday, she was ill with asthma again. Betrayal was the theme. She reviewed her distresses with me. I was allowed to correct the error in timing she spoke of to my view that I was badly out of tune with her by being on a different plane of abstraction, tracking long-term themes when she was wanting to live together the joy and happiness of the moment. That seemed a little better. I was allowed to repeat my belief that we were experiencing being different people, not that I was right and good and that she was wrong and bad. We were struggling in this together, but not as adversaries. She agreed, but expressed that she felt I was trying to send her away to resolve this difference with a consultant when she knew that she had to work it out with me. I agreed that it had to be worked out with me, but pointed that sometimes a third party can shed helpful light. Then I related the consultation that I had had last weekend regarding my work with her. So I'd gone and told Bob the difficulty I was in and came back. I told her I'd come to understand several things more fully. She listened quietly and intently, but gave little response at the time. I reviewed how I had talked about my dilemma with her. I had shared with my consultant how, from her perspective, it looked adversarial, and finally, despairing and bleak as she experienced the horror of emotional betrayal. I demonstrated with my hands, to Bob and then to her, the banging on the arm of the chair that I had and how I had related how angry I had been that she kept misunderstanding me as saying it was all her fault. And I was saying, I'm not saying that. I showed her the body freeze frame that Bob so carefully You know, isn't it embarrassing when someone reads your unconscious like that? You know, he sees me like this, and here's the tone of my voice. And he interpreted. And here's the interpretation that Bob spoke. Mother, I hate you for not being available to me, for not hearing what I have to say, for misinterpreting my love, for not being there when I need a response from you. I thought you understood me, and now I find you don't, which was my organizing mother. Yeah. Our work had succeeded in producing a regressive trend in me that stimulated my response to my own mother of infancy who failed to understand me, and it was being replicated for me in this particular experience. Her eyes grew larger, but still she was silent. I felt Sandy grasp what I was telling her about my regression in our situation, about my helplessness and anger, and about how fragile and pained I had become in our work together. I continued talking about my consultation. I relayed how I spoke about how what was happening between her and myself was of critical importance. I was tracking the disconnects on one level and she on another, and we weren't meeting, and how frustrating that was for both of us. I told my consultant that I knew somehow she was doing absolutely the right thing in raging at me, but I still couldn't understand completely what it was all about. I told her during my consultation I'd been sitting in a love seat when the consultant observed another body freeze frame. I showed her how I leaned forward and sideways towards a fetal position with my right thumb approaching my mouth. Our session was drawing near an end. Sandy asked a few questions to be sure she understood what I had just been telling her this hour about the oral and the fetal body regression that I was experiencing in our work. I communicated compassion for both of us in the dilemma we were in and the strength it took on both sides to allow this deep regression to occur. Several hours later, she left word for me to call, and I reached her mid-evening. She was sobbing and barely able to whisper. Her lungs and throat were unbearably tight in pain. Her whole body ached. She said she was breaking down and began uncontrollable sobbing. She assured me, however, that Mark, her boyfriend, was there with her, so she was okay, but she was very frightened and confused. But, she says, one thing keeps running through my mind that I don't think I've told you about before. As long as she could remember, whenever her mother was angry, her mother would first scream and yell, but then lapse into a cold and distant, withdrawn silence. Her mother literally wouldn't speak with her for days on end. They'd be occupying the same house, sitting at the same dinner table, and her mother would refuse to speak. She wasn't ever sure exactly what she had done to produce the awful silence in her mother, but it was icy and cruel. It felt like what she gets from me when I withdraw into silence. Then she said, the next part I'm not quite sure about, exactly what broke the cold silence, but it seemed like after a week or two, something would happen. Maybe we would be passing somewhere in the hall or something like that, and our eyes would catch, and I would break down. As soon as I'd break down, she'd be okay again, but she would hold out until I broke down. It was so cruel. How could anyone do something so unbelievably cruel to a child, holding out until she broke? And I did. I always did. I broke first, like it was a battle to see who could hold out the longest, and she always won. Even to this day, she still wins. I always have to speak first. I told her I thought something had happened when I shared my own helpless distress with her. She agreed. We talked about it in several ways. She was calming down now, glad for the talk. It seemed that when she could see my pain, my regression, something in our stalemate broke. For once, it wasn't her. I was not her mother. I broke down first. When I told her about my body regression in response to her, she knew that I was indeed connected to her. She knew I had feelings and that I wasn't her steely mother, that we weren't in an awful battle over who was most sane. She replied, right now I feel a tremendous need to be taken care of, to be physically attended to be held, caressed and comforted, like it's been a horrible trauma and I need comforting. I suggested she ask for physical comfort from Mark tonight. She asked if she could call me early in the morning. When she called the next morning, she told me that Mark held her all night. First one side of her body and then the other would be cold and be in terrible pain. He was glad to be there for her, and she reminded herself that despite her various frustrations with him, whenever she really needed him, he has indeed come through. I commented, Mark does care deeply for you, And he has the patience of a mother who holds on until things are okay again. This wasn't the first transference repetition with this woman, nor the last as we worked through this organizing transference. But in the aftermath, several interesting things were said. She had lunch with a close friend and laid out the whole story of her distress with me, and she felt very understood by her friend. She realized for the first time that I didn't have to be perfect to be her analyst. Then she expressed concern that she had made me feel so bad. I hastened to tell her that I was fine, that my regression was certainly in relationship to her, but that it was as much a part of our work together as my sharing it with her was. She said, I do know that. But all those things I said about you, you know they're true. I explained, that was the worst part. You know me too well. But she pondered, I don't know why I said them all to you so meanly. I have to think about that. I said, you had to remember the abuse somehow. And this is the only way. I know we both wish for pictures and stories that are easy to remember, that aren't so hard on us. It would be wonderful if we could simply and easily agree that you had bad parents. It would be altogether too easy to simply confront them on their shortcomings, their abusiveness, the cumulative strain trauma they caused you as a child and throughout your growing up years. But this painful re-experiencing kind of memory is much more difficult. This cruel, abusive battle, beginning as it did in earliest infancy, can only be remembered as trauma, rage, betrayal, confusion, fear, tightening in the throat and lungs, and cold and pain all over your body. The accusations are for the damage they caused you by being preoccupied with themselves. We then spoke of how fragile her mother must have been to have been so threatened by the relationship demands of a baby. She'd always thought of her mother as cold, calculating, strong, and cruel. Suddenly she understood it was not so, that her mother was desperately clinging to her own sanity. She could only hold on to the false life that he, her father, offered. She could hide herself safely in that false life with him. If there had ever been a choice between him or me, it would have been kill the baby. The following week, sessions were quiet, breathing calm. She even several times dozed off on the couch, almost asleep, thinking, dreaming, silently enjoying being with me and not having to entertain me, knowing that I was enjoying her peace and restfulness and mine. I had the fantasy of being a parent, lost in a timeless reverie in a rocking chair, cradling a beautiful baby. The following Monday, there was again despairing rage. It was pointless for her to continue analysis. She now knows that she can't trust me emotionally, that I'm fundamentally psychotic like her parents, and I can never provide her with the environment she needs to continue her analysis. You would just let me walk, meaning I don't care about what happens to her, that I would simply let her walk out. I assured her I could not prevent her from walking, but that would be a horrible loss for both of us, even as discouraged as she is with me at the moment. Perhaps it would help if she spent some time going over the problems she's having with me with the consultant. On Tuesday, she wordlessly moved the large wingback chair she's been sitting in, turning its back to me, and sat in silence the entire session. I couldn't tell if it was anger or despair she was feeling. Wednesday, she echoed the uselessness of going on with me, the hopelessness of it all, how psychotic I am, how despairing she is. I struggle to stay with her, and how awful it is to feel that there's no one to trust and nowhere to turn. It seemed what she had hoped for was that I'd be able to restore the interuterine state and the physical at oneness. Again and again, when she bumps into boundaries of myself or others, she's painfully reminded that Eden cannot be regained, that the lost maternal body is lost forever. It seems that she was abruptly and cruelly forced as a child into the realization that the necessary and longed-for features of her world were not under her control, and that she has been enraged and suffering ever since. She said she had to hold on to this rage, but she wasn't sure why, but she mustn't give in. I supported her in this, saying that she should not give in, that she must stay with her intuition. She must hold on to the rage, at least for now. But I was, for the first time at that point, worried that she might stop. Thursday, she came in and announced that she was mad. She looked more confused than angry. She declared that this situation is impossibly painful and confusing. She can't function. She doesn't know how she'll ever get through the weekend in this shape. And then came the deepest anguish I've ever heard from a human soul. I can't trust you because you're psychotic and you'll hurt me, but I can't let go of you or I'll die. I think every one of these recovered memories, that's at the bottom, and this woman was finally able to get there and state it. And I think all of you, if you take nothing else from today, can remember the one thing that this woman taught me. You're crazy, and if I stay with you, I'll be hurt. But if I leave you, I'll die. There was brief silence as we both grasped the impact of her powerful words. The truth had finally been spoken. We both immediately recognized the central definition of the emotional situation in which she had lived since infancy. We talked about it, how significant this definition is. It was like an enormous boil had finally broken. She was flooded with relief. Spontaneously, she related her discovery to a series of other distressing situations that have caused her puzzlement and pain all of her life. Now she could see them as somehow arranged by her to prevent contact by experiencing others as untrustworthy or even being closed off or defended parts of others' personalities to get them to do things that would prove she couldn't trust them or relate to them. On the way out, she said, "And there really isn't anyone that I can trust." I said, "Not in the way you've always wished to. They're crazy, and they may hurt you. But the problem you're stuck with is that even if you can't totally trust anybody, you do need people to relate to and to feel alive with." Thanks.